Hey guys, so today I am diving into my backlog and we are taking a look at a Paul Rubens palette that I have had for a while. Unfortunately, I had to tape it up because when I purchased it from Amazon a couple years ago, they put the sticker just right on it, which does save on packaging, but it does make it a liability for me to show on camera. But don't worry, I will remove the exterior wrapping and you guys will check out the palette. But I did want to show you guys kind of how it arrived to me in case there are any problems that we can be aware of it. This is also a palette that is recommended for professional use and for ages 14 and up. It is good to see a company actually kind of taking responsibility for their art supplies and not claiming that all art supplies are kid friendly, because that is definitely not the case. And art is not just for kids, it's for anybody with a creative bone in their body who wishes to make something pretty, something ugly, something funny, something serious, whatever speaks to your heart. So this is in keeping with Paul Rubens' more traditional palettes of watercolor. We've talked about their Gucai. Y'all have told me in the comments. I'm sure you'll be gracious and tell me again. This is kind of in keeping with that line that they were producing, may still be producing. And inside this beautiful little palette are some beautiful little pans, and hopefully time has been kind, as well as our information packet. And there is actually, so this is the Han series. So these are the colors here. This is in both Chinese as well as English. The writing is teeny tiny in English. I'm going to read it for you guys. So let me go put on my glasses and I'll be right back. In order to ensure the permanence of my paintings, I never use pigments whose quality does not meet my requirements. Salvador Dali. Although Western oil painting, watercolor, and powder pigment or powder painting have been introduced into China for many years, Chinese artists have been facing the problems of a few types of painting materials and uneven quality. On the one hand, the price of imported pigments is high, and it is difficult to purchase channels. On the other hand, it is difficult for domestic and artist self-made pigments to achieve stable, high quality. In order to make Chinese people use pigments with safe materials, stable colors, and first-class quality, Yu Jinhai, who has been engaged in the painting material industry for many years, founded the Paul Rubens brand. In 2005, Yu Jinhai, the founder of Paul Rubens brand, established a painting material R&D center. After visiting the European pigment factory, the birthplace of oil painting consulting, experienced pigment making masters, and collecting the opinions of many artists, chemists, and restoration experts, Yu Jinhai returned to China for product tests. After that, Yu Jinhai introduced the production process of Brookx, Brookx, which has a history of more than 150 years of manual oil painting pigment production, and made unremitting independent research and development, and finally gave birth to high-quality domestic pigment Paul Rubens. At first, Paul Rubens specially provided oil painting pigments for excellent Chinese artists, which was affirmed and supported by many friends in the art circle. In 2012, Paul Rubens became the exclusive cooperative brand of the Painting Materials Techniques Restoration Laboratory of the Chinese Academy of Oil Painting. Today, Paul Rubens has not only released the fourth generation of artist-level oil painting pigments, but also enriched the categories of painting materials such as watercolor, traditional Chinese painting, acrylic, colored chalk, oil painting stick, sketch paper, and so on. Now, Paul Rubens is committed to providing global painters with high-quality painting materials, developing and producing painting materials with Chinese characteristics, spreading the beauty of Oriental art, and making people fall in love with Chinese color. And then on, this spread here, bright color, delicate paste. Inject the essence of manual pigment grinding process to restore the natural charm of color. Accurately control the proportion of each raw material to ensure that the paste is dense and meticulous. Easy to diffuse, easy to dip in paint. It dissolves in water, atomizes in water, has strong diffusivity, is easy to clean without residue, extrudes the pigment, and easily dips it. Even if it is dry, it can be reused. Dry and wet stability, mounting without color fading. The powder punty, wait, I'm sorry. That's powder purity. That R and I are so close together, I think. The powder purity of the pigment is high, and it is not easy to get gray when drawing to the paper. The dry and wet changes are stable, the coloring force is strong, and the mounting without color fading. Again, here are the colors in this set. I believe the names correspond to what we see here. And then we have some information about the Han series Chinese painting pigments. The Gucai series of Chinese painting pigments are made of high clarity mineral pigment infused with the essence of the hand pigment grinding process to restore the natural charm of color. The ratio of each raw material is precisely controlled to ensure that the paste is creamy, dense, and meticulous. When used, the pigment will dissolve and atomize in water. It has strong diffusion and is easy to clean without residue. If you squeeze out the pigment, you can easily dip it and reuse it even if it is dry. With the high purity of toner, painting on paper is not easy to gray. With stable drying and wet changes, it has strong coloring power and does not blot when framed. This can make the creation more smooth and more natural. Sealed in a high quality, that's not this set here. Sealed in a high quality aluminum tube, it is more comfortable to use. So I did review their tube Gucci paints like 2 years ago. I didn't really like them. There was a lot of issues. So if you guys are curious about those, I think these are meant to be an improvement upon those. If you're curious about those, I'm going to have all of the Paul Rubens Gucci paints that I have reviewed linked down in the description. It's actually several sets. With the reinforced outer carton, it is exquisitely designed and packed with more care. And then the rest is just other languages. So what I understand from having read this, and actually appreciate them, I really appreciate them including it because it gives me some context, is these are more similar to traditional Chinese watercolors. They are meant to be handled thickly and opaquely. So it would be interesting to compare these against the other Gucci half pans that I have. Oh, okay. These have sat for a while, so the fact that this came right out is actually not that surprising. So I definitely want to do a head-to-head comparison against that other palette as well. So what I want to start, these have sat for a while. Now, usually when working with Gucci and Gansai style watercolors, I find that they tend to be very, very fast to reactivate and tend not to need pre-activation. But because these have sat for so long, I do want to give these a spritz and just give them a chance to kind of soak up some of that water. So for today's review, I am going to start on ripe Xuan Chinese watercolor paper. I'm going to swatch all these colors. I may also then swatch them on a Western cotton rag. I am thinking these would probably work decently well for origami, so we might do an origami postcard, but I definitely want to see how these handle before I decide how I want to play around with them. While these dry out, I'm going to do my normal disclaimer. Hi, I'm Becca Hillburn. While I am a watercolor artist and I have been painting watercolor comics for 15 years now and reviewing and teaching watercolor for 10 years, I am not an expert in Chinese watercolor. I am not claiming to be an expert in Chinese watercolor. I will probably not demonstrate the proper way to use these. This is something I purchased out of pocket because I enjoy exploring different watercolors from around the world. If you disagree with something that I do, if you know a better way to do it and you would be ever so generous as to kindly explain it to me in the comments, I would appreciate that. But I am not pretending like I am the expert here or that I know everything. I am coming at this from a Western style watercolor lens that has also been heavily influenced by Japanese artists who have used watercolor in manga and anime style art. So it is a very specific lens that I'm looking at this. So, you know, you may find that this video is not for you, and I completely and totally understand this. This is just something that I thought looked neat. I have been interested in Paul Rubens watercolors for a long time, and I have talked about them pretty frequently here on the channel, and I enjoy sharing what I do know about watercolor as well as my art with you guys here. So that's the lens that I'm looking at this through. This is probably not even truly a review because since I don't do Chinese watercolor, I'm not skilled in Chinese watercolor, I can't really look at it from that angle, and I can't really judge these on the properties that they're meant to be judged by. Let's take a look at the cover, because I think that is our indication of the kind of watercolor art these are really meant to be used for. And that is not really the kind of art that I do. I could do something kind of inspired by this, but it still wouldn't be the same. I don't have that historical knowledge. I don't have that background. While I think it's really interesting and I wish it was more commonly taught as in art history programs, unfortunately, and not by my own choice, but by the limit of choice, my background in art history is primarily like Renaissance Europe with a focus on Italy, which was not actually what I would have wanted. It's what the school offered, as well as art in the internet age, which is way more what I'm interested in. That's the difference between the University of New Orleans and my time at SCAD. So unfortunately, I don't have a background in Asian art as much as I would like. And it's something I'm like kind of picking at on my own time, but it's probably just not as in-depth as it would be if I had a couple of instructors who are very skilled and very knowledgeable about it. So I just wanted to kind of disclaimer that. I'm sure that might annoy some people that I'm doing this and I don't have that background, and I can understand that. Again, this might not be the video for you. I'm going to just kind of play around with these, talk about what I like, what I don't like about them. That is my own personal opinions based on my own personal biases, based on how I do watercolor. I'm also going to compare these to some other Paul Rubens watercolors, just in case you're curious about them. If you do this kind of watercolor, to see if it is a good fit, that sort of information. So hopefully through testing, you'll be able to, if you are looking for comparison information, you'll be able to find what you need. But otherwise, it's just kind of me indulging my own curiosity and sharing that with you guys. I was thinking about it, and since this is a Paul Rubens set, and I am actually using one of the Paul Rubens brushes for swatching, I have here this very cute little Paul Rubens sketchbook that I have done some swatching in. I've done some noodling around in, and I thought this could be fun to, you know, use for this as well. You know, why not? There's a bunch of wet tests in there. But anyway, I was thinking I could do some swatches in this, and I may still do it on Blick because that is kind of like a consistent one for me, and I know some of you guys really appreciate that consistency. You know, that tiny taste of the scientific method. As befitting Paul Rubens, the colors are rich, saturated, and creamy. This might be a Chinese watercolor formulation that is easier to work with than the Marie's Professional tubes. If you happen to like those color properties and that color family, this could be a good option for that kind of watercolor. So these have dried out for about an hour. It'll be interesting to see how they reactivate. This is a piece of Blick Cottonrag paper. It is block bound, and if you guys watch the channel, you know this is basically the standard, whether I'm using it in this size or a larger size. This is the standard that I use for the majority of my watercolor tests. These paints had dried out a bit, but they reactivated very readily. I don't really think these necessarily require pre-activation because they release color very quickly with just a little bit of water, and they really don't take any scrubbing at all. Dry, we also don't really lose any saturation. Given the style of watercolor that these are, they're not really meant for a whole lot of color mixing, but I'm going to do just a little bit of two-color mixing just to see. Call me a completionist, but you know, while we do have a good selection of colors here, there are some colors, some types of greens that you might want that could only be achieved by mixing yellow and blue. I want to point out that I do know that these are not really designed for a lot of color mixing, maybe 1 to 2 colors. I was able to mix some nice secondary colors, so this would be very helpful in adjusting colors to get exactly what you're looking for. You can also mix some skin tones with these, which is really nice. Satisfied with the secondary colors we were able to mix. We were able to get some more nuanced purples, some more nuanced greens, as well as some skin tones. I'm not really that interested in trying to mix oranges because the set has plenty of oranges. We also can get some really interesting grays by mixing like the two cinnabar-esque colors with some of the greens. So I'm pretty happy with that as well. Since these are more opaque watercolors, I did want to try them out on some colored papers. So I have Tone Tan Mixed Media here, and I have Shizen Black watercolor as well. Now this mixed media paper is more of like a plate tooth than really like a watercolor tooth. I know I have some colored watercolor paper around, and I just have to find it, and I may use that for the field test. But this will kind of give us a good idea of how well these show up on colored papers. These paints show up really well on these papers. You can really see the colors. There's a lot of opaque colors that really stand up on the color of the paper. So if you like to work on darker papers or on colored papers, these could be a good option for that. I've got some ideas for a field test, but we're not there yet. Now I want to compare this Paul Rubens palette against a few other Paul Rubens palettes. And before I forget, I think both papers take these paints quite well. Some of them are still a little bit wet. The plate texture on the mixed media paper, you can see it doesn't take it as well. There is some pooling, but on this Shizen black paper, we have several colors that really stand up nicely to the black paper. Okay, so we are going to be comparing this palette here. We're going to be comparing this palette, which is also a Gucci palette. And it may just be a larger version of the same palette. We're going to also compare this Paul Rubens Youlan palette. So this is Western style watercolors from Paul Rubens. And we're also going to compare and swatch against the Paul Rubens Qaoimei watercolor set. And this is one I reviewed a while back. So these are all watercolors that I have reviewed. I will link them for you guys down in the description below if you are curious to learn more about each of these individual palettes. So we're going to start with the Paul Rubens Han set. This is a 24 color set. The color palette is very similar to Marie's Professional Chinese Watercolors. This is an easier form factor for someone like me to work with. I'd love to comparison swatch against the Marie's, but those tubes have spoiled and corroded over time. So I'm going to link the Marie's Professional Watercolors videos in the description instead. In general though, I really like this set. I like the colors and I'm finding it easy to work with. This is the Paul Rubens Gucci set. This is a 36 color set. This was purchased off of AliExpress a while back. I suspect that this is kind of a larger version of the Han set, but y'all let me know if y'all know. Paul Rubens is kind of scarce when it comes to information. The color palettes seem a little different though, so maybe this is inspired by a different time period. I really would love to know. And in the past, I have comparison swatched the Gucci palette shown here against Kuretake Gansai Tambi. So if you're curious about that, that will be linked in the description for you guys. These are not as opaque as the Han set and they don't muddy the water as much. I also reviewed the tube Gucci set and I really disliked them and had a lot of issues with them. The video is going to be linked in the description, but they seem to have discontinued that version. So I see no need to pull those out and compare them. I really do like these Gucci paints. I enjoyed using them for the field test in their video. I like how vibrant the colors are and they activate very readily, but they do seem to be a little bit different from the Han palette. So I could see having both palettes as the Han palette does have slightly different colors than this palette. Finally is the Qaoimei palette. This palette is kind of an odd one. I'm not really sure what Paul Rubens' goals were with this or who it's intended for. It's a 24 color palette and it's a more modern color palette which includes a magenta. This is also more modular and travel friendly, so it may be more beginner friendly. It's almost like a modern version of the Han palette. If you guys, so I've reviewed this and I wasn't able to dig up a whole lot of information about this palette in particular. So if you guys actually know more about this, or if anybody from Paul Rubens is watching and can tell me more about this palette, I'd love to learn more about it. I think it's an interesting palette, but I have no idea where to place it in the Paul Rubens lineup. Finally, we have the Youlan set. This is a 48-piece set. I believe this is the highest grade watercolors that Paul Rubens offers. This is a well-rounded mix of colors, mostly modern. These are Western style watercolors in formulation. They don't really require a lot of pre-activation. They activate very readily and don't require any scrubbing. This is a really good all-rounder set, and this is one I would recommend for comic artists and illustrators. It just has the kind of colors that we tend to use the most often. It could just be me, but I feel like the Han palette gives off a more old-fashioned vibe with gentler colors, like a retro vibe. I look forward to playing around with it for the field test. think all 4 sets have kind of distinctive uses. The Gucai Han set has different colors than the larger Gucai set, which has almost more modern in a way colors, and then the Qaoimei set is even brighter and includes like very popular Western watercolor colors like sap green or like magenta. And then the Youlan set has it's a 48 color set and it just has a lot of options, and it's pretty standard for a 48 color Western style watercolor set. So I feel like it really varies based on what kind of mood you're looking for and what needs you have when it comes to watercolor. So before I start my illustration, I actually wanted to swatch on this sage green mixed media paper to see how these colors would look and to see how they would layer. And this kind of also gives me an idea of how well this paper will handle these watercolors, because not all mixed media papers handle watercolor particularly well. So I kind of wanted to know what I was getting into before I started an illustration. I also decided to double up the layers to see if we could build up opacity and if that's a technique that I could use in the illustration that I'm going to be working on in just a minute. So I have sketched an illustration of wild roses in a honeybee using red lead using the sage green mixed media paper. I'm going to tape down the edges using some low tack painter's tape. I believe it's Nishiki. And I've also got some Chinese watercolor weights to help me out. So for this field test, I really wanted to focus on the opaque qualities of these watercolors, their ability to stand up to a darker color paper. And I'm also going to utilize some underpainting techniques to really make some of these colors pop a little bit more, like doing a layer of white beneath the roses before I paint on top of that. Now, this is not necessarily something I would do a whole lot of when it comes to traditional Western style, more transparent watercolors, but it is a helpful technique for kind of building up that contrast and vibrancy and making your reds pop on a green paper like this. This paper handles like a hot press, so it's got kind of like a plate texture to it. There aren't any of like the sort of divots or indentations or grit that you would get with a cold press. So I don't necessarily want to do a whole lot of layers on this. And also this would be a paper that would not necessarily show a lot of granulation if these colors granulated. One thing I feel though is that Paul Rubens makes a lot of watercolors and they don't do a great job differentiating between them or indicating who they're for. So it can be hard to kind of figure out what watercolors from Paul Rubens might be a great fit for you personally. They do make a lot of really good watercolors. It is a brand that I've really come to enjoy, and I really like how their products handle, but it can be kind of hard to review them sometimes without that very necessary information of who these paints might be for, who the intended audience is. Now, since the Frugal Crafter beat me to the punch by getting her review out first, I decided to go in a different direction for the field test and utilize the more opaque and immediate properties of these watercolors working on a toned paper. These work very well, almost like a pan gouache, and the white does a great job of tinting and lightening color while adding body and opacity. To give this illustration a little bit more of a sense of place. So I'm doing kind of a washout technique with the indigo. This is not normally something I would do on a hot press style paper like this, as washes can be really a miss on hot press and plate style papers, but I felt like this was going to give these flowers, like make them feel like they're not floating on blank paper and make them feel just like a little bit more placed in the illustration. know I absolutely did not have to ink this, but I chose to do so anyway, just to kind of clean things up and kind of tighten things up just a little bit. I wanted to do a second field test illustration, but first I'm making a color map to go in the box of watercolors on a cold pressed cotton rag watercolor paper. This just makes it easier to select colors as I paint, and I like to keep this reference in the box itself. And like I did with the sage green, I'm doing a secondary layer just to kind of demonstrate that these colors do work well when built up. This was sketched and inked in my Arrtx, Arrtx, A-R-R-T-X, Arrtx. How would you guys pronounce that? Anyway, in their Cottonrag watercolor sketchbook. I've talked about this a little bit in other reviews. It's fine. I like the paper, and I did want to kind of fill it up and use it up. So for this illustration, while it is kind of inspired somewhat by like more traditional Chinese fairies and that kind of art, it's still more in like the kind of illustration style that I typically do, because I wanted to really see how well these colors work, how well these paints work, more watered down, to see how flexible these paints are, and if these would be something that I could recommend to Western style painters who want to both paint very translucently and also build up color very quickly. I could have sworn I had show notes for this field test, and I don't. So I'm just going to go back off of my memory. So there's some things I wanted to test out with this style of illustration. I wanted to test out wet and wet on a textured paper that's designed to take this kind of layering. I wanted to test out painting people, painting skin tones, because that's something that I regularly do. And let's be real, I'm a watercolor comic artist. That is my primary background, and that's the lens that I look at watercolor through. So, you know, that's an important test for me. I also wanted to try out layering colors on a paper like this. And I am so sorry. I have no idea why Joseph decided to go right by the window in the room that I'm recording with one of those like wind blower machines, but he did. And I hate that noise. So I apologize for that if it's picking it up. It's super distracting for me. I also wanted to test out like adding blush and blending that out, just like all the kind of properties that I usually use for watercolor, doing multiple layers on a cotton rag paper, doing wet into wet, and then layering on top of it. And in general, these paints took everything I threw at them quite well. I do wish this illustration in and of itself was larger and better composed, because it's a pretty weak illustration, I'll admit that. But it was really just meant to use up a piece of the sketchbook, you know, fill a page in a nice little sketchbook, and to test out these watercolors. Not everything has to be overworked and super serious, I know, and for that regard, this illustration did a fine job. Basically, I would compare these the most to Marie's Professional Chinese watercolors. And honestly, I kind of like these better. I like the formulation. They're very easy to handle. They're very easy to clean up. They don't necessarily have a strong smell. It's easy to mix colors. They do have a good amount of opacity by design, but you know, you can blend them out. You can color mix them, and they don't just totally fall apart. They're very much it makes sense. They're part of the Paul Rubens lineup. Paul Rubens usually does a really good job with their watercolors. I have had a few products that were kind of weird, where the formulation was strange, or they went off, or they spoiled, or sometimes the color shifting, kind of depending on the products. But overall, my experiences with Paul Rubens and their student grade Mei Liang has been really great. And there's a reason this is a brand that I recommend time and time again. Here on my YouTube channel, I review watercolors very frequently. So if you enjoy watercolor reviews, whether you're shopping for watercolors or you have FOMO and you don't want to miss out on something good, and believe me, sometimes watching a review and somebody else being like, yeah, I didn't really care for this, completely scratches that fear of missing out risk. I love watching other people's reviews, but anyway, that's a thing that I do here regularly on the channel. So if you enjoy these kind of videos, and I almost always put watercolors to at least one watercolor field test, maybe it's an origami postcard, maybe it's a floral illustration, maybe it's an illustration like this one, but I always, or almost always, field test my watercolor paints. So there's always a pretty strong element of illustration, painting, composition, and design to all of my reviews. So if this is something that you enjoy, please consider subscribing and making my channel a part of your art habit. I had absolutely no problems building up these colors, mixing colors, being able to achieve the kind of colors that I wanted, whether they are super gentle and soft pastels like on her clothing, or much darker mixes like her hair, the leaves, and the camellia blossoms. I was able to layer and do glazes and do underglazes. Basically, I really enjoyed these watercolors. They would not be the #1 Paul Rubens product that I would recommend, just because they are kind of harder to find and it is kind of a limited selection. But if you enjoy this kind of colorway, or if you enjoy the ability to almost use your watercolors as a gouache, but not have them completely turn to mud when you water them down, this is a pretty good palette for that. And I would definitely recommend this palette if you enjoy Chinese watercolor. All right, y'all, it is time to talk about the pros and cons of Paul Rubens Han watercolors. And we're going to start on a high note. These are saturated, vibrant, and quick to activate color. They work well for opaque applications as well as more transparent applications, so they're also a very flexible watercolors. What about the cons? These are kind of a rarity and a one-off sort of thing, and probably not really intended for the US market, although they are available to the US market in a limited color range. So what's my verdict? I honestly like these. I think they perform well and are quite flexible, but I don't think for every watercolor artist. I think that this is an interesting but somewhat niche product, and if you watch this far and think it's a good fit for you and your needs, it probably is. But if you're only buying it for the transparent properties, I recommend the regular Paul Rubens Youlan palette. As always, thank you guys so much for joining me today. This palette was purchased out of pocket with funds from both my Patreon as well as my in-person teaching engagements. All opinions are my own and are based on my years of experience as a watercolor comic artist, a watercolor illustrator, and as an art educator. You are totally free to have your own differing opinions. I'd love to hear them all. Love to hear all about them down in the comments below. But please remember to be civil, because we are all humans here and we're all artists here, and we come to our own conclusions based on our own lived experiences and the kind of art that we happen to like and the kind of art that we want to create. So basically, everybody is valid. Let's be chill and civil here. If you enjoy reviews like this one, make sure that you are subscribed. YouTube tells me that 80% of you guys came here because YouTube recommended a video, or you came here through the search page, which means most of you guys are not subscribers. So if you like what I do here, it'd really mean a lot to me if you took a moment and subscribed. I have been on YouTube for over 10 years now. I have over 4 million views and I still haven't even reached 50K subscribers. And it would really mean a lot to me to be able to earn that silver play button for all my hard work. So hopefully you'll consider joining me. It doesn't cost you anything at all and it means the world to me. Speaking of things that mean a lot, if you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit like. I do actually check. And not only does that tell YouTube to recommend my things to other people, but it tells me to keep on doing what I'm doing. So if you enjoyed this video, please remember to hit like and subscribe. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Hopefully this was helpful in allowing you to make art a habit, to make art a part of your everyday life, because I sincerely believe that's finding supplies that are a good fit for you and for your needs is a major part of making art a regular part of your life. You shouldn't have to fight with your art supplies. I want to thank my amazing patrons whose names you guys are going to see in a moment. Y'all's support really keeps me going. I really appreciate it, especially in tough times like these. It really means a lot to me. Thank you guys so much. If you'd like to keep up with what I'm doing and you can't afford to support me over on Patreon, you can always follow my Patreon for free. And that way you'll get email updates when I update my Patreon, which I try to do once every week, every 2 weeks, with works in progress, what's going on in my life, and new videos. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Bye, guys.